The unveiling of Maria's destiny. The crisp morning air in Belo Horizonte hung heavy, thick with unspoken judgment, as a woman's world imploded around her. "You are an incomplete woman," her husband and mother-in-law spat, their words sharper than any blade, as they cast her out, a mere inconvenience for a life she could not conceive. With only a small suitcase, Maria stepped into the vast, indifferent expanse of the world, her silence a shield against the crushing humiliation. Little did they know, this was not an ending, but the genesis of an epic transformation. 3 years later, a sleek limousine pulled up, and from its depths emerged not a broken woman, but a vision of triumph, a beautiful daughter in her arms, and a millionaire by her side. Do you ever wonder what seeds of strength lie dormant within us until they are brutally awakened? What deep well of resilience can be found when everything you thought defined you is stripped away? Maria Luisa, at 32, felt the crushing weight of an entire world upon her shoulders within the Medeiros' opulent living room. Every crystal vase, every oil portrait seemed to gaze upon her with disdain. The plush Persian rug, once a symbol of comfort, was now a minefield, each step a tremor of anxiety. Across from her, on a lavish Italian leather sofa, sat her husband, Eduardo, a renowned physician whose cowardly neutrality cut deeper than any accusation, and his mother, Donna Lucia, her eyes cold, her mouth a thin line of contempt. Donna Lucia clutched a white envelope, a death sentence in her hands, the results of Maria Luisa's latest medical tests, extinguishing the last flicker of hope for a child. The air so desperately demanded. "I don't understand why it took so long to admit the truth." Lucia's voice sliced the silence, sharp as broken glass. "So many doctors, so much money spent. For what? To confirm what I always knew." Maria Luisa swallowed hard, a knot tightening in her throat. "Lucia, please. The doctors said there are still possibilities. Treatments." "Treatments," Lucia scoffed, a humorless sound. "Don't be naive, child. Nature has given its verdict. You are a barren tree, a sterile field." She advanced slowly, her expensive perfume suffocating Maria Luisa. A woman who cannot give her husband a child is not a complete woman. She is a failure, and in this family, we do not tolerate failures. Each word was a physical blow. Maria Luisa's eyes pleaded with Eduardo, a silent cry for defense, for the love he once swore. But he remained silent, his face a mask of indifference. In that instant, she grasped the terrifying depth of her solitude. She wasn't his wife. She was a vessel that had failed its purpose. "Eduardo and I have talked," Lucia continued, her tone chillingly final. "And we have reached a conclusion. There is no longer a place for you here. Your presence in this house has become inconvenient." The word inconvenient echoed in Maria Luisa's mind. Years of dedication, of love, of building a life beside him, all reduced to a mere inconvenience. A maid, a long-time family employee, appeared at the doorway, dragging a small suitcase. Maria Luisa's. Inside, a few haphazardly thrown clothes, a pair of shoes, the scant belongings that were unequivocally hers. Lucia pulled a crisp 100 reais note from her purse and extended it. "Take it, for a taxi. It's the least we can do." The gesture was the ultimate humiliation, a meager act of charity that stripped her of all dignity. Maria Luisa looked at the note, then at her mother-in-law's face, and finally at Eduardo, who had at last lifted his head. There was no remorse in his eyes, only cold relief, the relief of someone shedding a burden. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange calm enveloped her, a chilling clarity that froze her tears before they could form. There was a strength within her she hadn't known she possessed, an ember refusing to extinguish under the storm of contempt. In silence, she took the suitcase, ignoring the offered note, leaving it suspended in the air. A silent insult. She walked towards the door, each step firm, her back straight. She didn't look back. As she crossed the threshold of the house she once called home, the morning sun touched her face, but she felt no warmth. Everything was cold. The world seemed vast and frightening, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like a place where she could breathe. The humiliation had stripped her bare, but it had also liberated her from the cruel expectations of that family. As the iron gate clicked shut behind her, a silent fire began to burn in her chest. It wasn't the fire of hatred, but of fierce determination. They had cast her out, deeming her useless. One day, she would show them the true meaning of her worth. The closing gate marked the end of a chapter and the beginning of a deafening silence. Maria Luisa stood on the sidewalk, the suitcase heavy in her hand, the morning sun warming the asphalt. Cars passed. People walked. The city's life pulsed around her, indifferent to the cataclysm that had just devastated her world. The imposing house behind her, its windows like empty eyes, was no longer her home. It was a mausoleum of dead dreams. The first decision was the hardest: where to go. Her parents had passed years ago, and distant relatives barely knew her. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The taxi she finally hailed did not take her to a luxury hotel or a confidant's home. She had neither. The money she possessed was what remained in her bank account, a modest sum saved from her allowance, which had felt more like a salary for managing the Medeiros household than a gift from a loving husband. She asked the driver to take her to Contagem, in the metropolitan region, an instinctive choice, a flight to anonymity, where the Medeiros name meant nothing, and she could disappear into the crowd. The room she found for rent was the antithesis of the suite she had occupied for almost a decade. A small room with walls in need of paint, a window overlooking a brick wall, and a persistent smell of mold. The bed was narrow, the mattress sagged. The bathroom was shared with 3 other tenants in a dimly lit hallway. This once unthinkable space became her refuge. Here, no one judged her. Here, the only expectation was to pay the rent at the end of the month. The transition from luxury to that cubicle was brutal. In the first few nights, the tears came, silent and bitter, muffled by the thin pillow. It was grief for a life she now realized had been an illusion, a gilded cage from which she had been violently expelled. The money wouldn't last forever. Necessity, stronger than wounded pride, pushed her onto the streets in search of work. Without a completed university education, interrupted to marry Eduardo, and no formal professional experience, her options were limited. She saw an advertisement on a pole, a simple, handwritten sign. Kitchen assistant wanted. Inquire within. The place was a busy, noisy restaurant, the kind that serves frenetic lunch specials. The smell of grease and spices hit her like a wall. The owner, a burly man in a stained apron, looked her up and down skeptically. "Do you know what hard work is, girl? There's no glamour here." She simply nodded, her voice firm. "I need the job. I learn fast." Something in her determination convinced him. She was hired. Her new reality was an inferno of steaming pots and slippery floors. Her hands, once accustomed to expensive creams, became rough and calloused. Her back ached under the weight of vegetable boxes she had to carry. The incessant noise of the industrial kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the shouted orders, all contrasted with the oppressive silence of the mansion. She returned to her room at the end of the day, exhausted, her body aching, the smell of frying clinging to her hair and clothes. The fatigue was so profound, there was barely room for self-pity. She ate what was left over from the restaurant, surviving on the bare minimum, every penny saved with a fierce purpose. But her salary barely covered rent and basic expenses. Financial freedom, a concept that once seemed abstract, became an obsession. A distant dream that kept her going. She needed more. That's how she found her second job, a position as an attendant at a small coffee shop in downtown Belo Horizonte, working weekends and some evenings. The bus ride from Contagam to the center was long and tiring, but she faced it with a resilience that surprised even herself. The coffee shop was her counterpoint. If the restaurant kitchen was chaos, the coffee shop was an oasis of relative calm. The aroma of ground coffee replaced that of grease. Here, she dealt with people, served smiles along with espressos and cappuccinos, listened to fragments of conversations, and watched other people's lives unfold in small coffee breaks. It was a humble job, but it reconnected her with a normalcy she thought she had lost forever. Living with the essential, with the minimum, taught her the true value of things. The value of a hot meal at the end of an exhausting day. The value of a roof over her head, however simple. The value of her own strength, which she discovered was far greater than she had ever imagined. In the solitude of her room, surrounded by the simplicity of her new life, a new dream began to take shape. It was no longer the dream of a child or a perfect family. It was a more intimate, more powerful dream. The dream of never again depending on anyone. The dream of being the sole architect of her own destiny. That silent fire born on the day of her expulsion did not go out. On the contrary, the daily grind, the fatigue, and the loneliness were the fuel that made it stronger, a stubborn flame illuminating the darkness and guiding her towards a future she would build herself, piece by piece. Months blurred into incessant work, a routine marked by the alarm clock before dawn, and the exhaustion that drove her to bed at night. Maria Luisa's life was a cycle of crowded buses, hot kitchens, and the aroma of coffee. She moved through this new existence with an almost mechanical efficiency, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind focused on a single goal: survive, save, and advance. The pain of betrayal and humiliation had transformed into a tough outer shell, an armor that protected her, but also isolated her. It was on a gray Thursday afternoon, her day off from kitchen work, that she picked up an extra shift at the coffee shop when fate decided to shuffle the cards. Business was slow, and she was methodically wiping the stainless steel counter when the bell above the door jingled. A man entered, shaking fine rain from a black umbrella. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the cozy environment, and then his gaze landed on her. There was a hesitation, a spark of recognition on his face that made her stop what she was doing. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled his modern-cut suit well, but there was something in his hesitant smile that was incredibly familiar. His hair was shorter, with a few silver strands at the temples, but his warm, kind brown eyes were unmistakable. "Malu," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and uncertainty. The nickname hit her like a wave of warmth, an echo of a distant, simpler past, a life before the Medeiros, before the pain. No one had called her Malu in over a decade. "Raphael," she responded, the name a whisper. Raphael, her childhood neighbor and best friend, the boy she used to climb trees with and share secrets in her backyard. The last time she saw him was at his mother's funeral years ago. He had hugged her then and said he'd be there if she ever needed him. But life and her marriage to Eduardo had led them down opposite paths. He approached the counter, his smile now fully open. My God, it really is you. I almost didn't believe it. What are you doing here? The question was genuine, without a hint of judgment, only curiosity. Maria Luisa felt her face flush. For an instant, the shame of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. The ex-wife of a renowned doctor serving coffee. But then she looked into his eyes and saw no pity, only the same boy who once helped her fix her bicycle chain. It's a long story, she said, forcing a small smile. I'm working. Starting over, she clarified. He seemed to understand there was more behind those words. He ordered a coffee, and as she prepared it, the conversation flowed with unexpected ease. He told her he had moved to Betim and opened a small logistics company that, with much effort, was finally growing. And then he surprised her. I never forgot, you know, he said, his tone suddenly serious. How you took care of my mother in those last few months. She was so sick, and my father and I were lost. You went there every day after your classes, read to her, kept her company. She adored you. She used to say you had a heart of gold and a mind for bringing order to any chaos. His words opened a small crack in her armor. She remembered his mother, a sweet lady who had taught her how to make cornmeal cake. Caring for her wasn't a burden, but an act of kindness. Your mother was a wonderful person, she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Raphael watched her for a long moment, seeing not just a coffee shop attendant, but the organized girl and resilient woman before him. Malu, this might seem sudden, but I need help. My company is growing faster than I can manage. I'm drowning in spreadsheets, invoices, schedules. I need someone trustworthy, someone with a mind for bringing order to chaos. He smiled. I'm looking for an administrative assistant. The salary isn't multinational, but it's a start. It's a real job, with a formal contract, in an office. The offer hung in the air between them, laden with potential. It was more than a job. It was a bridge. A bridge away from the smell of grease, away from sleepless nights, and the constant fear of not being able to pay the rent. It was a chance to use her mind, her intelligence, something she felt had been buried alive for years. The fear of change and the insecurity of not being good enough wrestled with the wave of hope rising in her chest. I don't have formal experience, Raphael. She began, but he interrupted her. You have what matters: intelligence, integrity, and the need for a chance. You'll learn the rest. I know you will. In that moment, Maria Luisa felt the silent fire within her burn brighter. No longer an ember of survival, but a flame of possibility. She looked at her hands, which had become strong and calloused from hard work, and then at the honest face of her childhood friend. Life had knocked her down, dragged her through the mud. But there, in an ordinary coffee shop, he was offering her a hand to get back up, and she, with all the strength she had discovered, decided to grasp it. I accept, she said, and for the first time in a long time, her smile wasn't forced. It was the genuine radiance of a new dawn. The transition from the coffee shop counter to an office chair was like learning to breathe a new kind of air. In her first days at Raphael's logistics company in Betim, Maria Luisa felt a mix of euphoria and dread. The environment was a universe of ringing phones, incoming emails, and the constant hum of printers. It was the organized chaos Raphael had described, and she, coming from a world of pots and order tickets, felt like a stranger in an unknown land. She was afraid of pressing the wrong button, of replying to an email inappropriately, of not living up to the faith her friend had placed in her. But necessity is an unforgiving teacher, and Maria Luisa's determination was a dedicated student. She observed, she listened, and above all, she learned. She started with simple tasks, organizing invoices, answering phone calls, scheduling truck pickups and deliveries. These tasks demanded what she had in abundance: method and attention to detail. The same organization she used to keep her tiny room impeccable, she now applied to the company's spreadsheets. In a few weeks, what had been a chaotic pile of papers on Raphael's desk transformed into a color-coded filing system. The driver's routes, once confusingly scribbled on a whiteboard, were migrated to a shared spreadsheet that optimized time and fuel. Raphael noticed the change almost immediately. He saw not just an assistant, but a potential partner. He began to involve her in bigger decisions, asking her opinion on hiring new drivers or negotiating with suppliers. "What do you think, Malu? This supplier's cost is lower, but their delivery history is inconsistent. Is it worth the risk?" He valued her practical perspective, her ability to see problems from a different angle. During the day, Maria Luisa dove headfirst into the world of logistics. She became the backbone of the operation, the person everyone turned to when something went wrong. Her confidence grew with each problem solved, each sincere compliment from Raphael. Her salary, though still modest, was the first money she truly felt was hers, earned not through a marriage agreement, but through her own competence. But the ambition born amidst the grime of the industrial kitchen was not content. She knew that organization was just the first step. True freedom, financial freedom, required more. And so, her nights gained a new purpose. After a long day of work and the bus ride back to Contagem, when fatigue begged for rest, she turned on the old notebook she had bought in 12 installments. The small screen became her window to a new world: finance. She started with free online courses on basic financial education. She learned about budgeting, the difference between assets and liabilities, and the power of compound interest. The money that once barely paid her rent was now meticulously divided. A portion for expenses, a portion for an emergency reserve, and a small yet sacred portion for investments. She devoured books, articles, and videos about the stock market, real estate funds, and how to make money work for her. Financial jargon, which once seemed like a foreign language, began to make sense. Little by little, with small amounts, she started to invest. Every real invested was a declaration of independence, a brick in the construction of her future. Surprisingly, she decided to keep her weekend job at the coffee shop. Raphael thought she was overworking herself, but for Maria Luisa, the coffee shop had become something more. It was her point of contact with reality, a humble reminder of where she had come from. Serving coffee, talking to customers, listening to their stories. It kept her grounded. It prevented ambition from blinding her. It was there, in that simple environment, that she felt most herself, the woman who was the sum of all her experiences, from the kitchen to the office, from humiliation to overcoming. One Saturday, while cleaning a table, she overheard a couple discussing the best way to finance the purchase of an apartment. Without thinking, she approached them with a smile. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Have you considered looking at the rates for a real estate consortium? Sometimes, depending on your profile, it can be more advantageous than traditional bank financing because of the interest." The couple Demetra, initially surprised, began to ask her questions. In 10 minutes, Maria Luisa gave them an informal lesson on financial planning, with a clarity and simplicity that impressed them. As she watched them leave, grateful and with a new perspective, she felt a deep satisfaction. She realized that her knowledge wasn't just for herself, it could help other people. The humbled kitchen assistant was transforming. The organized assistant was evolving. A new identity was emerging, that of a strategist, a woman who not only understood numbers and logistics, but who understood the value of knowledge and the power of sharing it. The fire in her chest was no longer silent. It was a bright light, guiding her way, and unknowingly, about to illuminate the lives of others. Love was a chapter Maria Luisa believed she had closed in her life. Her heart, after the demolition caused by Eduardo, was rebuilt with the materials of self-preservation and professional focus. Relationships were a luxury for which she had neither time nor emotional energy. Her days were dedicated to logistics, her nights to finance, and her weekends to that coffee shop that had become her sanctuary of normalcy. Love, if it existed, could wait for someone else. The Sunday everything changed dawned gray and melancholic, with a fine drizzle that invited introspection. Business at the coffee shop was slow, a steady but calm flow of people seeking shelter and the comfort of a hot drink. Maria Luisa worked behind the counter, polishing cups, the soft sound of bossa nova filling the air. That's when he walked in. Unlike most hurried customers, he moved with deliberate calm. He wasn't the type of ostentatious beauty that immediately grabs attention, but there was a magnetic presence about him, an aura of quiet confidence. He was 38, though he looked younger, with dark hair and deep, thoughtful gray eyes. He dressed with elegant simplicity, a cashmere sweater, jeans, and leather shoes that hinted at quality without screaming for attention. He chose a small table in the corner near the window and opened a book, seeming perfectly content in his own company. Maria Luisa served him with her usual cordial efficiency. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and thanked her with a contained smile that barely touched his lips but reached his eyes. She returned to her post, but every now and then her gaze was drawn to the quiet figure in the corner. Later, one of her regular customers, an elderly lady named Dona Elvira, sat at the counter. She was worried about her pension, which barely covered her bills. "Oh, my dear," she lamented. "If only I had known then what I know today, I would have saved every penny under my mattress." Moved by a surge of compassion, Maria Luisa leaned in and began to speak to her in a low voice. "Dona Elvira, under the mattress. Money loses value because of inflation, but it's never too late. Have you heard of Tesouro Direto, Brazilian Treasury Direct? It's a safe investment, guaranteed by the government, and yields more than savings. With a little bit each month, you can have extra security." She took a napkin and began to draw a simple graph, explaining with infinite patience how compound interest could work in her favor. She spoke not with the arrogance of an expert, but with the clarity of someone genuinely wanting to help. She didn't notice that the man in the corner had closed his book and was now watching her, his head slightly tilted, an expression of genuine interest on his face. When Dona Elvira left, more animated and promising to research the subject, the man stood up and approached the counter. "Excuse my intrusion," he said, his voice calm and deep, but that was the most lucid explanation of investments I've ever heard, given in a cafe. Maria Luisa felt her face flush. "I was just trying to help." "You did more than that," he continued, leaning slightly on the counter. "You translated a complex concept into something accessible and human. That's a rare talent. My name is Vinicius." "Maria Luisa," she replied, extending her hand. His handshake was firm and warm. The conversation that followed flowed with a naturalness that startled her. He didn't ask about her past, nor did he make her feel diminished by her apron. Instead, he asked about her ideas, about the books she read, about her economic views. Vinicius, she discovered, was a significant name in the technology sector, a millionaire who had built his fortune from scratch with an innovative idea. but he spoke of his success with a disarming humility, more interested in listening than in talking about himself. He was captivated not only by her intelligence, but by the story she gradually revealed. The story of a woman who was discarded and who rose again through strength and knowledge. He didn't see a victim, he saw a warrior. And Maria Luisa, for the first time since her separation, felt truly seen. Vinicius wasn't looking at the ex-wife of a doctor, nor at the coffee shop attendant, nor even at the promising logistics assistant. He was looking at her essence, at the woman who combined resilience forged in fire with a strategic mind and a compassionate heart. When the coffee shop was about to close, he was still there. "I know this is unexpected," he said, "but I'd love to continue this conversation, perhaps over dinner, somewhere you don't have to serve me coffee." She hesitated. Fear, that old ghost, whispered in her ear. But then she looked into Vinicius's gray eyes and saw respect, admiration, and a kindness that seemed as solid as the earth. She was building a new life, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was space in it for more than just work and survival. "I'd love to," she replied, and the smile she gave was the most genuine of her life. That meeting on a cloudy Sunday was not just the beginning of a romance. It was the collision of two worlds, the union of two souls, who, in different ways, understood what it meant to build something from nothing. For Vinicius, it was the discovery that the greatest wealth was not in his financial assets, but in the depth of a woman who found value in herself when the world said she had none. For Maria Luisa, it was proof that true love did not diminish her or define her by her ability to bear a child, but celebrated her for all that she was. A true, improbable, and overwhelming connection was born. The relationship with Vinicius blossomed like a rare flower in a garden. The first dinner turned into a second, and then into countless conversations that stretched late into the night. With him, she learned to lower her guard, to dismantle, brick by brick, the wall she had built around her heart. Vinicius was not a man of grandiose, empty gestures. His love manifested in his attention, his profound respect for her journey, and his unwavering belief in her potential. He celebrated her achievements at the logistics company, listened with fascination to her investment strategies, and, most importantly, loved the woman beneath all those layers, the strong, intelligent, and at times vulnerable woman. A year passed, a year of growth, partnership, and a quiet, deep love that healed her from the inside out. Maria Luisa no longer lived in the small room in Contagam. Vinicius convinced her to move into his apartment, a modern and minimalist space with a stunning city view. But he insisted she do it on her own terms. She fiercely maintained her hard-won financial independence and continued to thrive in her work with Rafael, where she was no longer an assistant, but an operations manager. Life was good, stable, full in a way she never dared to dream. Regarding children, the wound that defined her expulsion became a distant scar, an old pain that no longer throbbed. She and Vinicius had talked about it. He knew of her diagnosis and assured her that his love for her did not depend on an heir. If fate did not give them children, they would build a legacy in other ways. She accepted this. She was at peace. It was then that her body began to send strange signals. At first, she ignored them. A wave of morning sickness she attributed to strong coffee, overwhelming fatigue. At the end of the day, she blamed on the stress of a big contract she was negotiating. Her breasts were tender, but she presumed it was a normal hormonal fluctuation. The idea of a pregnancy was so remote, so medically improbable, that it didn't even cross the threshold of her conscious mind. It was a universe of possibilities The doctors and her old life had told her was permanently closed to her, but the symptoms persisted, becoming impossible to ignore. One morning, the smell of the coffee Vinicius was brewing, an aroma she had always loved, sent her rushing to the bathroom. It was then that a tiny, terrifying seed of doubt was planted. "It can't be," the phrase echoed in her mind. "It's impossible." With trembling hands, she went to a pharmacy during her lunch break. She bought a pregnancy test and hid it in the bottom of her purse, as if it were an illicit object. The small box seemed to weigh a ton, laden with the weight of all her past hopes and disappointments. She waited until she got home that night. Vinicius had a late meeting, so she was alone. In the silence of the luxurious bathroom, which contrasted so sharply with the shared bathroom of her old room, she took the test. The 3 minutes of waiting were the longest of her life. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, her heart pounding against her ribs, an orchestra of fear and fragile hope dueling within her. She dared not hope. Hope had been her torturer for years. When the time was up, she forced herself to look. 2 lines. 2 clear, unmistakable blue lines. She looked again and again. She picked up the box, read the instructions once, twice, 3 times, as if she could have misinterpreted such a universally clear symbol. But there was no mistake. Positive. The air seemed to flee her lungs. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just sat in absolute shock, the test in her hand, as the world she knew completely reorganized around her. The woman who was called incomplete, a barren tree, carried a life within her. It was a miracle that defied logic, medicine, and the cruelty of the past. When Vinicius arrived, he found her sitting on the living room sofa, in the dark, the small white test on the coffee table. He saw the expression on her face, and his first thought was that something terrible had happened. "Malu, what's wrong? Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. She couldn't speak. She just pointed to the test. He approached, picked up the object, and examined it under the dim light of the lamp. His eyes widened. He looked from the test to her and back to the test. Is this real?" he whispered, his voice choked. She finally found her voice, a fragile thread. "I don't know how. The doctor said—" Vinicius didn't let her finish. He knelt in front of her, took her face in his hands, and looked into her eyes. The tears she hadn't been able to shed now flowed freely. But the tears in his eyes were not of shock. They were of pure, overwhelming joy. "They were wrong," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They were all wrong, my love." He embraced her, a hug that was both protective and celebratory. And in that embrace, Maria Luisa's shock finally dissolved into a wave of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. It was real. It was a miracle. Their love had created the impossible. The birth of little Maria Clara, 9 months later, was not just the arrival of a daughter. It was the final affirmation of Maria Luisa's victory over her past. Holding that tiny being in her arms, so dreamed of and so improbable, was like holding redemption itself. The girl had her father's thoughtful gray eyes and her mother's resilient smile. She was living proof that the labels others impose on us have no power over what destiny, love, and inner strength can achieve. Maria Clara's birth sealed the couple's love in an indescribable way and marked the definitive turning point in Maria Luisa's life. She was no longer the woman who couldn't have children. She was a mother, and this new identity, gained against all odds, was the sweetest and most triumphant of all. 3 years passed. 3 years that transformed Maria Luisa in ways she never could have predicted. On that fateful day, she was cast out onto the street with a suitcase and a 100 note. The woman who survived in a moldy room and rose again in industrial kitchens was now a mother, a respected business strategist, and partner to one of the most influential men in the technology sector. Life, which once denied her everything, now offered her an abundance of love, purpose, and peace. The past, with its wounds and humiliations, seemed like an old movie, someone else's story, until the past knocked on her door in the form of a message on her cell phone, bearing a familiar crest. It was an invitation. Marcela, her ex-sister-in-law, Eduardo's sister, invited her to an annual charity event hosted by the Medeiros family. The event, ironically, would be held in the very house from which she was expelled. The same garden, the same living room, the same stage of her greatest humiliation. Her first reaction was a visceral urge to delete the message and not respond. Why would Marcela invite her? Was it an act of provocation? An attempt to flaunt the life that continued without her? Vinicius, seeing her holding her phone with white knuckles, approached and read over her shoulder. "You don't have to go," he said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I know," she replied, her voice tense, but something within her, an undercurrent of curiosity and a need for closure, prevented her from dismissing the idea. Going back to that house wasn't about them, not anymore. It was about her. It was about the woman she was today, facing the ghosts of the woman she was forced to leave behind. "I think I want to go," she said, surprising herself. "We'll go together." The night of the event arrived with a clear, starry sky, a perfect backdrop for Belo Horizonte's elite to display their jewels and calculated philanthropy. On the street of the old Medeiros house, a line of elegantly dressed guests exited luxury cars. The sound of classical music and lively conversations floated through the air. All eyes turned as a long, imposing black limousine pulled up at the beginning of the street, momentarily blocking traffic. Most presumed it was just another magnate or politician arriving with their usual pomp. The car door opened. The first to step out was Vinicius, impeccable in a tailored tuxedo. His discreet but powerful presence made some heads turn. But it was the woman who descended next, who caused a ripple of silence in the crowd. Maria Luisa. She wore an emerald green silk dress that enhanced the quiet strength in her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and the only jewelry she wore was a delicate diamond necklace, a gift from Vinicius. She didn't look like the same woman. There was a confidence in her posture, a serenity in her smile that was entirely new. But the real surprise, the masterful stroke that paralyzed everyone, came next. From the car door, in Maria Luisa's arms, descended a little girl, almost 4 years old, dressed in a small white dress, her dark hair tied with a satin ribbon. It was Maria Clara. As they walked along the red carpet leading to the house entrance, the murmur turned into a shocked silence. People stopped talking. Mansion staff, with trays, froze in place. All eyes were fixed on the woman who had been erased from that family's history, returning not as a loser, but as a queen, accompanied by a new king, and holding the heir they told her she could never have. Inside the house, the scene repeated itself. Marcela, the hostess, dropped her glass, the sound of crystal shattering on marble being the only noise in the hall. Then Maria Luisa saw them. Near the grand fireplace, where she had once been condemned, stood Eduardo and Donna Lucia. Eduardo's face lost all color, transforming into a mask of disbelief and something that looked like regret. His eyes were fixed on the child in Maria Luisa's arms, a child who could have been his. Donna Lucia, always so haughty and controlled, seemed to have aged 10 years in a single second. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The shock on her face was absolute, a mixture of astonishment, fury, and undeniable defeat. The woman she called incomplete was there, the personification of completeness, and her presence was a more powerful accusation than any words. Maria Luisa felt everyone's gaze on her, but her focus was only on them. She expected to feel anger, a desire for revenge, a triumphant pleasure in their dismay. But to her surprise, she felt none of that. Looking at her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law, now diminished figures by the shock, she felt only a strange and distant compassion. They hadn't destroyed her. In fact, by expelling her, they had freed her. They forced her to find a strength she didn't know she possessed, to build a life far greater and truer than she ever would have had within those golden walls. She didn't need to say anything. Her happiness was her answer. Her family was her victory. With an almost imperceptible nod in their direction, a gesture that was neither defiant nor forgiving, but simply acknowledging. She turned. Vinicius placed a protective arm around her, and together they mingled with the crowd, leaving behind the couple who remained frozen in time, haunted by the ghost of what they had thrown away. The triumphant return was complete. The atmosphere at the party shifted after their arrival. Where before there had been a buzz of conversations, now there were whispers. Gazes followed Maria Luisa and Vinicius wherever they went, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and, in some cases, the discomfort of those witnessing a seismic upheaval in the social status quo. Maria Luisa, however, moved through the crowd with serene grace, little Maria Clara secure in her arms, occasionally passing her to a proud Vinicius. She greeted some acquaintances with polished smiles, exchanged kind words with other guests, and made a generous donation to the charity cause, the act itself a silent declaration of her new position. Her true focus, however, was not on the party, but on herself. Every step she took in that familiar environment was an exercise in reevaluation. She passed the staircase where she had cried so many times in silence, saw the garden where she had dreamed of a future that turned out to be a mirage, and looked at the dining room where countless meals had been consumed in icy tension under Donna Lucia's critical gaze. But the places no longer held power over her. They were just rooms, walls, and furniture, stripped of the emotional weight they once carried. The ghosts had been exorcised. Across the hall, she could see Eduardo. He didn't try to approach, just watched her from afar, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. In his gaze, she no longer saw the arrogant, self-assured doctor, but a haunted man, confronted with the tangible image of everything he had lost. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the chance to be the man who stood by her in her rebirth, the father of the miraculous child, who now smiled in another man's arms. That look in his eyes, a mixture of remorse and envy, was the final confirmation for Maria Luisa. The anger she had held for so long, the resentment that had fueled her first steps in her new life, simply dissipated. There was nothing left to be said or felt. Indifference was the final piece. After about 2 hours, enough time to mark her presence and affirm her new reality, Maria Luisa felt it was time to go. There was nothing more for her there. She exchanged a glance with Vinicius, who understood immediately. He took her hand, and together with Maria Clara asleep on her father's shoulder, they headed for the exit. As they left the house, the night air felt lighter, cleaner. The music and whispers of the party faded behind them, muffled by the soft sound of their steps on the stone path. As they waited for the limousine to approach, Maria Luisa took out her cell phone. With a calm and deliberate gesture, she opened her contact list, found Eduardo's number, which she had never had the courage or need to delete, and selected it. For a moment, she looked at the name on the screen. Eduardo Medeiros, a name that once represented her entire world. Now it was just a vestige of a past life. Without hesitation, she pressed the delete contact option. The confirmation appeared on the screen, and with a final touch, he was gone. It was a small, digital act, almost insignificant. But for her, it was the ritual that sealed the end of an era. It was not an act of anger, but of liberation. It was the final tidying, the last piece of emotional baggage being discarded. She was not erasing the memory, but the access, the connection, the remote possibility of any future contact. She was closing the door and locking it, not to keep him out, but to keep herself fully within her new life. Vinicius watched the gesture in silence, understanding its depth. He said nothing, just squeezed her hand more tightly. When the car door opened, revealing the luxurious and safe interior, Maria Luisa entered, feeling a profound relief course through her body. As she settled into the soft leather seat, with her daughter sleeping peacefully and the man who loved her for who she was by her side, she looked one last time through the window at the illuminated house. She realized, with crystal clarity, that the cycle was complete. The woman who had left that house on foot, humiliated and heartbroken, was now departing in a limousine, her heart overflowing with the love and happiness she had built herself. Leaning back in the seat and feeling the car glide smoothly through the night, she knew with absolute certainty that the most painful chapter of her life was not just closed. It was finally and forever overcome. In the days that followed, as the story of her return spread like wildfire through the city, Maria Luisa felt a new stirring. Her journey was extraordinary, but she knew from personal experience that it was not unique. How many other women were out there feeling discarded, invisible, worthless after the end of a relationship? How many Marias, former housewives without income, suddenly found themselves adrift, without the tools to navigate a world that demanded financial and professional independence? The idea began as a late-night conversation with Vinicius on the balcony of their apartment, with the city sparkling below. "I was lucky, Vinny," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I found Rafael. I found you. But what about those who don't have a childhood friend to give them a chance? And what about those who don't find a love that truly sees them?" Vinicius, always her biggest supporter, listened attentively. "Then we'll help them create their own luck," he replied, with the simplicity of a man accustomed to turning ideas into reality. And so, the seed of the Mujeres que Renascem, Women Who Reborn, foundation was planted. It was not meant to be an act of charity, but of empowerment. Maria Luisa didn't want to give handouts. She wanted to distribute tools. She and Vinicius joined forces, he with his capital and strategic business vision, she with her life experience, her financial intelligence, and her visceral empathy for the cause. They spent months planning, structuring, transforming inspiration into a concrete action plan. The foundation was inaugurated in a modern commercial building in the city center, a space that radiated professionalism and welcome. The mission was clear: to offer a complete program for women who needed to restart after difficult separations. The program included psychological support to deal with trauma, professional training courses in high-demand areas, career mentorship, and the central pillar of Maria Luisa's vision, robust financial education that taught everything from how to set up a budget to how to make first investments. The first participant to cross the foundation's doors was Silvana. At 40, she was the image of helplessness. After 2 decades as a mother and housewife, exclusively dedicated to her husband and children, her divorce left her without income, without a profession, and with shattered self-esteem. She arrived with slumped shoulders and a lost gaze, carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty. Maria Luisa received her personally. She didn't see a failed woman. She saw herself, years ago, standing on the sidewalk with a suitcase in her hand. In their first conversation, Maria Luisa didn't talk about spreadsheets or business plans. She listened. She listened to Silvana's story, validated her pain, and shared a fragment of her own journey. "I know it seems impossible now, Silvana," she said, "but the strong woman you need is already within you. Our job here is just to help you find your way back to yourself." Silvana began the program. In therapy sessions, she started to untie the emotional knots of the past. In training courses, she discovered an unexpected talent for event organization. And in financial classes with Maria Luisa, her eyes lit up. For the first time, she understood that she could have control over her own money, that she could plan a secure future for herself. Silvana's transformation was remarkable. In 6 months, the woman with slumped shoulders gave way to a confident professional. With the help of the foundation's mentorship, she got a job as an assistant in an event company. The first salary she received, earned by her own effort, was a moment of pure emotion. She called Maria Luisa, crying. "I did it," she said through tears. "I did it." Silvana's story was the first of many. The Mujeres que Renascem Foundation became a beacon of hope. The project's social impact grew exponentially. Women who arrived broken left reconstructed, not just with jobs, but with dignity, autonomy, and a support network formed by other women who understood exactly what they had been through. The foundation was not just a place of learning, it was a sisterhood. Maria Luisa found in her work at the foundation a purpose that transcended her own success. Every woman she helped to rise again was a victory against the system that once discarded her. It was her silent and powerful answer to all the voices that had once told her she was useless. She didn't need revenge. Her legacy was being built in the life of every woman who, inspired by her journey, learned to bloom from her own ruins. She transformed her deepest pain into her noblest mission. Today, at 38, Maria Luisa's life is a symphony of peace and purpose. The hustle and bustle of Belo Horizonte are behind her, replaced by the serenity of a mansion in Nova Lima, a modern, glass-filled refuge that blends seamlessly with the verdant landscape of the Minas Gerais mountains. It is a home that doesn't shout wealth, but whispers tranquility. The walls that once imprisoned her have been replaced by floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding each room with natural light and the view of a lush garden where Maria Clara runs freely, her laughter echoing through the clean air. Maria Luisa's routine is a balance she choreographed herself. Mornings are dedicated to family. She and Vinicius have breakfast together on the balcony, a sacred ritual of connection before the outside world calls him. Afterward, she takes Maria Clara to school, a short drive filled with children's songs and conversations about dolls, princesses, and stars. But her role as a mother does not define her completely. It strengthens her. As the afternoon sun gilded the landscape, she felt Vinicius's hand find hers. He looked at her without needing words, and she smiled back, a smile that contained a universe of gratitude. In that moment, she didn't think about the past, nor the battles won. She thought only of the now and the simple truth her journey had taught her. The enduring bloom, a lesson in resilience. Life has an astonishing capacity to remake itself. The greatest turning points don't happen when the world changes around us, but when we discover the strength that already exists within us. For life doesn't ask if we are ready for the next chapter. It simply turns the page. And on each blank page lies the opportunity to write an even better story, with more wisdom, more courage, and, above all, with the certainty that our worth is not defined by those who leave us, but by what we decide to become. If Maria Luisa's journey touched your heart, please show your support. Like this story, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell to follow all our narratives. Your engagement helps us share more tales of overcoming adversity and finding profound value in life's unexpected twists. What did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments with a rating from 0 to 10. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video.